Okay, next one. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders.
I'm mixed on this one because
I'm gonna say disagree.
Yeah, I would agree with
say
that.
It shouldn't be the only social responsibility. I think a company should look out for safety, health. I mean, depending on what industry it is, I think they should also consider, the health and safety of people using their product. But I think the main responsibility is, yes, delivering a profit to the shareholders.
I disagree with you. I disagree. I would put the same thing you did, which was I think it's a regular agree or regular disagree. I'm a mix there. I don't know exactly which one to put, but I think a company's first responsibility is to contribute to our society, American society, not necessarily their shareholders. I think it's equally important or a little bit less, but I think it's the main goal of a company should to improve the life of the American citizen.
It's a strongly disagree from me. I think the system in which a company has a social responsibility to its shareholders of making a profit is a failed system, because then you just lead to companies seeking to make a profit, which is what leads to a majority of our problems today within the economy, and boxes us into the thing, like when we had that whole debate about the movement of people and materials through the one that was talking about regrettable personal fortunes, people who manipulate money. The fact that companies feel a need to bring shareholders the fact that they have a social responsibility is what enables people like that to amass a personal fortune.
I put disagree. I think where me and Hayden differ is that I think what you're saying is how perhaps ideally it would work. I just don't think that can work, and that's why I put disagree as opposed to strongly disagree.
Okay.
The rich are too highly taxed. For this one, this is an interesting one because I think in certain circumstances you can argue for both, but see, this is a tough question because for me, I think what has happened is it doesn't matter how much you tax them after a certain point, because once you sort of hit a certain level of taxing the rich, they're going to find ways to get out of it. And you can look up the statistics. The amount of money that the government pulls in as tax revenue, it does not change. Like, it really doesn't change all that much when you raise the tax rate on the rich. So I just don't think it really matters, because we have not found a way to actually get the money from the rich. So you can talk about old tax rates, but it's pretty much always been the same. It's just what the politicians tell you and what they write into law, but what they write into law is not the actual outcome. So I guess my answer would be I feel like I'm just kind of neutral just because there isn't an answer to this question. Do you
think that they're too highly? Do you think that if you were to lower the tax rates on the rich, that it would contribute to society?
I mean, I think to a certain extent, yes, because I don't have much faith in the government to spend their money. But I'm going to think. You guys talk.
Okay. Yeah, you can give us an answer.
My final verdict.
It's such a strongly agree for me, and I think if you hold any other position, I just don't see a way to reconcile it. And the fact that the fact that you can say, functionally it doesn't work out that way. Well, that's a problem in and of itself. But the fact that the wage gap, the fact that the wealth gap, that the gap between the middle class shrinking and the gap between the first class, the gap between the rich and the poor is widening every single year by such a substantial margin. And I think that whether or not you have faith in the government to redistribute it, I don't have faith. I have even less faith in rich people who are only looking to make a profit than a government who's actively trying to make the lives of citizens better, even if they fail. But
I do think what's important to recognize in this scenario is that when you talk about the wage or the wealth gap between the rich and the poor the people who are rich and the people who are poor every year, they change. People flutter, they lose their money, they gain more money. So it's not someone who's, I mean, in certain cases, it is someone who's poor
But
for most
and
of
yet
their life. But as people get older, they make more money. And yes, people who are younger are going to have a lower net worth, but that's just a given because they just started working.
and yet
So the wealth
wealthy
gap is not a fully viable way to look at an economy, in my personal opinion, based on how our economy is working.
Okay. You guys go ahead.
I'm going to say strongly agree. There's a huge wealth disparity in our country.
I think you mean strongly disagree, Ben.
No, he means strongly agree. He's being based.
Are you saying they are too highly taxed, or they aren't?
No, you guys are you're
they're
reading.
not high. They're not taxed enough.
Then you'd be strongly disagree.
No.
Yeah,
because it's saying
The
the rich
rich
are
are
too
highly taxed.
Yeah,
Oh.
so it'd be strongly disagree.
No.
I, for my opinion, it would be agree or disagree because I think it's just a little bit of a difference. For example, companies like Amazon aren't paying anything in taxes, and I think that's a little different. And in our can I finish? In our society, if we tax them too much, they'll go to AI or they'll outsource. But I also think you need to combat that with protectionism. So, but then the more like the upper middle class or just the not necessarily the billionaires. I think you need to have them there to provide for people that are working. They're employees is what you also have to focus on. The upper middle class, you don't need to highly tax as much in the middle class, but the ones at the very, very top, like Amazon not paying anything in taxes, you also need to combat it with protectionism so they don't outsource it as a result of you taxing them. So
the reason Amazon didn't pay taxes is because they had taken losses in previous years to grow their company. And so that's something that it's a law that allows them to get out of federal taxes in the future. So they can sustain early losses, which allows businesses to grow more. So that's not something that will last forever. It will run out eventually.
But that's a difference of opinion on that law then, because then I don't think that,
Well, the law is designed to allow businesses to it's rewarding them for taking losses to build their business. Basically. Okay. I'm going to put agree just because I do think there's trickle down does have its merits, or you can call it trickle down. Supply side, there's a bunch of different names for it, and there's a reason for that, of course. But
trickle up.
That now.
All right.
I bet
those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Strongly agree. Of course. Yeah, because if you go with a socialized Medicare system, Medicare for all, like they have in Canada or in Europe, then the quality of care decreases significantly.
Yeah.
For rich people.
A lot.
Hold on. For rich people.
Right. It does. But the rich people should have the ability to increase the standards of their care. I don't
higher standards of medical
socialized. There has to be some sort of a public option in terms of healthcare. I mean, because we're talking about people's lives that are on the line. Now, I know that the lower class has terrible healthcare and they're probably dying and getting infected with diseases and all that at a higher rate. But I think that it could be a very bad thing if it's just completely socialized. As a general policy, I do not fundamentally agree with Medicare for all because I think the government sucks at their job. They suck.
Fact. That is absolutely based. I put strongly agree. I just don't think you can socialize Medicare.
I would say agree. I would say agree or strongly agree because because like Hayden was saying, only for the rich people does the quality of Medicare go down. But you also have also the middle class's quality. Maybe the lower. I think there should be multiple options for people. But even the privatized system isn't all that great either. I think we should strive to find something better. But I think this is saying the rich should have an ability to pay for something that is more efficient.
Pretending
on the whole we have the best system. It's not necessarily the right system, but it's the best one.
That's actually statistically wrong. I'm gonna have to. It's like
I'm saying for our country. because there's
You're saying for America?
variables.
No.
I'm not saying America has the best healthcare. I'm saying on the whole, it has the best healthcare system generally. There obviously need to be improvements made, but on the whole, for our country, I think it's what will work best with minor changes being needed, obviously. I kind of jumped the gun in what I was saying there in the wrong way.
I disagree with this one. The ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Okay, that's a great way to phrase the question, but then who are you paying? Corporations? Because I think if you socialize healthcare and then say, okay, you can pay, if you want to pay X amount to the government, which would, cover the which would cover like a public healthcare, socialized healthcare. And if you wanted to say, okay, we will tier the level of care, and so rich people can put more money into a nationalized healthcare system that will pay for easier methods, then I say, okay, I see what you're saying there. But then the issue becomes with private healthcare, this is completely immoral. And since private healthcare is the system that we have in place right now, it's a disagree from me. Cool.
Okay, next one. Government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. I mean, if you're thinking about if you're thinking about in terms of what we have,
this is a terribly worded question. What does that mean? I mean, if it's like if they're selling a product and they're lying about like that product and what it does, yeah, of course. But
that's what the FDA is.
But like corporations like CNN or Fox News or the media, you can't penalize them for misleading people, because you can obviously have some host that comes on and states misleading.
Well, yeah, because it's also because you also have to think about politics. You have to think about if who's in charge of the government, who they control what they consider misleading, right? So, for example, if a right-wing government is in power, then what comes out of CNN could be always considered misleading, and the other way around. If it's a left-wing government, what comes out of Fox News or other right-wing sources could be considered misleading, and then you'd have what would go against what our Constitution was for everyone to have a right to speak, and they shouldn't be penalized for stuff like that. But in terms of like health and safety, that's completely different, but we do have stuff set up for that in this country.
Right now, on the whole, I agree with you, Nathan. I just don't understand the question. What are they talking about mislead? Like in terms of what? Because if we're talking ideologies and we're talking about like politics, of course not. They shouldn't, because exactly what you're talking about. But like if we're talking in terms of like a necessary industry like health or something in concern to safety, then yeah, of course, because it would be for the common good for it to be need to be penalized.
I just think that's too much power to vest in a government. So
I'd say disagree or strongly disagree.
Too much.
I just have I don't know what they're talking about. Like
it's kind of a weird question. I think
such a terribly worded question. I mean, I think they're talking about corporate like ideologies. So I can say disagree. Also, this just came in my head. I might go disagree on too highly taxed, because I think this is kind of what Nico was saying. I don't trust the government to redistribute the wealth very well. Mm-hmm. I mean, the same exact. So,
but how do you
trust a perfect real world example? California and Texas. Okay, so in California, you have the government has a very large role in citizens' lives. The tax rate is very high, yet the wealth disparity is like we're number 4 in wealth disparity in California. Number 4. And how explain to me how that
there happens. Are other reasons than just taxes.
That's a totally correlated question and not causated question at all, because the amount of immigration that occurs in California for rich people looking for for poor people looking for an opportunity, and rich people who want to exercise that opportunity, it's a correlated question.
I mean, you can't just say like the whole statistic is bogus, because there are some reasons that exaggerate it, but it's not just because tax rates. I mean, I'd play devil's advocate there.
Right, no, I'm not saying like high tax rates cause like wealth disparity, or like I don't. It's not a causation, but I don't trust the government.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily
but
happen.
then how do you trust rich people? How do you trust rich people then?
Hayden,
Because rich people mutually benefit from causing businesses.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not necessarily, because at least with rich people you understand what they're doing rather than the government. It's all the because Hayden, your difference of benefiting everybody else is completely different than what benefits the economy. Rather, if rich people were to keep more of their money, they put it into the economy, as we were saying earlier. But with the government, even though their goals may be moral or may be justified, of like they want to help poor people or everybody in this country, it doesn't always happen. But then you also have to think of corruption, which is another thing that plays part in this government.
Yeah,
you have to fix that too. So I think it would be beneficial.
But I think the inherent goal of corporations is corruption. Versus
yes, because
the goal of a government is not corruption.
Not corrupt.
But because I would agree with you there, because corporations are the ones that are influencing the government. Like that's the reason for corruption, is due to the fact that they.
So why would you give money to corporations?
Because you're not necessarily giving money. You're just not taking as much.
You're giving it to the people who own them.
No, you're taking less money from the corporations. Those are two.
Because now,
just like because it's not their wealth anyway.
But then they're putting it back into the economy.
Yeah. Corporations are going to put it back.
Are they though? Because
I put it into their business and they give it to their.
See, Hayden, I think we would agree if we were able to make sure that the government wasn't corrupt, but we can't. We can't physically do that as of yet. Like in this government, we can't functionally make sure that the government's not corrupt. What we have in place right now is allowing corruption, and what you want to do would not help.
But then you're just squandering your vote. You're just throwing your vote away.
I think we just disagree.
I don't think that's necessarily true. That's a very you're taking it.
I think you have more influence on the government than you have influence on a rich person.
Not necessarily, because if you hate a company enough, and enough people do, if a company is purely acting on.
But give me an example of that happening once. Because I can give you an example every 4 years of a reactionary people reacting to a government in which they dislike the way that it was maintained, in a flip of the
nothing. But nothing
when
really
you centralize an economy to that level, it's not the elected officials that are making the decisions, but it's the people who are chosen by those elected officials, who are working in government ministries and what have you, that are making those decisions. And that's where you see government corruption. You don't see as much government corruption with elected officials.
But if all of the elected officials were to be socialist, and they would appoint people who are similar in their values.
But people have personal motives, and those personal motives always get in the way.
Of course they do. But I'm saying a rich person's personal motive is inherently profit versus a government's personal motive.
Yeah, but profit does benefit,
I don't think so.
I think
it
but
can.
Then you have the wealth gap. But then we're getting to something.
The wealth gap is not as concrete of a thing. It's not as tangible as you make it out to seem. I mean, I suppose we could disagree on that, but.
Yeah, that's why I think we should try it.
But then why is it?
Yeah, I think we're at impasse.
It's time because we're just.
Yeah, we're just kind of.
This is a different value. Again, another difference of values.
Right. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Strongly agree.
I would say regular agree.
The problem with a free market is that eventually, when these multinational companies evolve, it isn't free anymore.
Yeah,
it's just many governments operating within the guise of the economy.
I think the threat of monopolies is exaggerated, but on the whole, you do need regulation. So I'd put agree.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much debate there. Okay.
How many pages do we got left? This is 3 of. Oh.
No, but I think economics is the longest one, and I think that's where we're going to have the most debate.
Okay, abortion when the woman's life is not threatened should
always be illegal.
We'll
just move quicker.
Strongly agree. Strongly agree.
Strongly disagree.
But okay, and then also I would like to add in the fact that with I think it's important of the government to also maintain a family structure, because if you don't have the father in there, it's not fair just for the mother to be forced to raise it. So I think there should be some sort of social structure set up to prevent it being completely thrown onto the mother. And also in cases of like, rape and stuff like that is also important to, address, especially when it's a child too, like a child rape.
Right. My views on abortion have actually shifted. I used to think this was a good statement and that it should be illegal if the woman's life is in danger, is not in danger. But now I think like the beginning of life is just so subjective. I don't think the government
I don't think it's subjective. I disagree with you.
Well, I mean, I know a lot of
the fact that you two are agreeing shows it's subjective.
It is right. It is subjective. So I don't think the
no, but scientifically, scientific.
I think abortion is up to the person and that person's ideology. Personally,
no, but scientific. But then you're going against science.
That abortion is morally bad, but I don't think it's objectively a bad thing to get an abortion. Therefore, I wouldn't force my opposing view on abortion on other people in a governmental sense. So
it's not the place of the government.
Right, exactly. So like you think about, I actually listened to somebody, I didn't even know this, and this is not, I'm not religious at all, so I don't really, I can't really back this up. But I think in Judaism, they say once it hits 40 days, once the pregnancy hits 40 days, then it becomes a life. But before that, you can do anything.
I think that's the 40 days
ceremony. That's an ideology.
I don't know for sure.
Think that it's not a life and it doesn't have intrinsic value.
Then I think that, I'm not certain, but I'm Christian and we have a 40-day ceremony after birth. That might be what they're talking about. I'm not certain on that, but that could be it.
But Ben, also, you can't say morality is subjective for this case because you're debating whether it's a life or not. And if it is a life,
morality is subjective. Morality is
but not. I'm not talking about overall morality. I'm talking about whether you agree with this as a life or not. Because Ben, if you personally agree with this being a life at a certain point in time, then anything before that time, anything after that time that you believe.
Nathan, then you're saying that if something has the potential to be a fully fledged human, then it is murder by stopping that potential, correct?
Say again, sorry, my earbuds cutting out.
If you're saying that anything that has the potential of being, since the fetus has a potential of being a fully fledged human, stopping that potential when it is certain that it would become is inherently immoral, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying that point is it already is a human.
But it's
I don't think we're gonna get anywhere with this.
Okay,
but it's not.
You think it's a human. You personally do.
Yeah.
But you're forcing that view on everybody else by making it a law.
And it's pro-choice.
But
if you want to be pro-choice, pick. If you think it's immoral, don't do it.
But
exactly.
that's not fair because if you're talking about a life, for example, if you put the same role in murder, well, it's different. If you put the same thing in, murdering someone personally, if someone personally doesn't believe that person was ever human in the first place, but you're like, well, I can't force that person to subscribe to my beliefs, so I'm not going to force the government to do anything about it.
I think it's too ambiguous to ask the government to make a clear-cut decision.
But that's
I don't think we're going to.
That's just you thinking the government's always Mr. Madman. That's not true.
I think we're saying the same thing, just with different phrasing, different.
Okay, next.
Yeah, I guess we can move on.
I'll do it.
Should be questioned. Oh, sorry, Nick.
Strongly agree.
Yeah, I strongly agree.
Yeah, I'm going to say disagree.
Authority. I don't think it's just kind of forced us not to.
Disagree. I'm going to say disagree for that one.
An eye
for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
Strongly agree.
No, disagree.
I don't think that's the best way of punishing people for stuff. I just think it's a bit.
Well, I mean, if you take it into account, for example, like stealing, you can't steal from that person. I just say chop off their hand. That's you can't.
You can find them.
Yeah.
No, I think you should just chop off their hand. That's just.
Oh my god.
Based.
Like then they can't steal again. You see?
It's a disagree for me because I think that there's nothing constructive about that kind of justice. You're not advancing anything forward, and therefore it's.
I think it's just too excessive in many cases, so I put disagree.
I bet. Moving on, taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial.
Strongly agree.
I'm gonna say disagree.
Agree.
Yeah,
I'm gonna say disagree.
Really interesting.
Yeah, because it's important for this culture of this country to be upheld, even though people don't necessarily
But
go
then the
to it.
value isn't there. By the people not going to those theaters and museums, we're seeing that people
A change in
really
values, and
value.
that's not necessarily a good thing. That's a difference. If you
But
know,
is it the government's job to uphold?
yes,
I mean,
yes.
I just don't think that's the place of the government.
But that's just your point of saying like, oh, the government can't do anything except, just because then what's the point of the government in general? Like,
The point of
what
the
do you
government is to facilitate society, ensure that people have
facilitate
life, liberty,
society?
and property.
Exactly.
There's not much more that needs to do.
So you're saying get rid of completely everything, and that would be regulations for the environment. That would
No, protect life, liberty, and property.
But technically, if you think about it, you're not
In
necessarily
America, it's pursuit
affected.
of happiness, and I think the best way to protect, I'll use pursuit of happiness because I actually agree with that more. You're trying to give the most equal opportunity without unrealistic
But
like not docking people for success too much, I suppose would be the best way of saying that.
okay, schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I strongly disagree.
Yes.
I think we should change maybe the school system, but I think it should be compulsory.
Classroom attendance.
I could disagree. I'm not like that strong on it, but I think kids need to
Wait. What do they mean by classroom? Because
you have to go to school.
Are they trying to like say something about homeschooling? Because I think
that's what I'm thinking.
No, I think because homeschooling is, I think this is more like kids who don't go to school for some, I don't know. Maybe it is though. I just put
Classroom attended. I mean, they should not make classroom attendance. I think moving forward, making it illegal is interesting. I'm gonna go agree on this one.
I think it should be compulsory. Okay, next one.
Yeah, it should be compulsory to teach the values of the nation. That's why school should be there.
Well, and to make sure you have an educated population that's capable of making.
But education is subjective.
I think education is slowly moving towards not accomplishing that goal.
Exactly. That's my point. That's why I would agree. Whatever it is, strongly disagree or strongly agree with that statement. As long as we reform the school system.
All right. All people have their rights, but it's better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own time.
I just do whatever you want.
Well, okay. I'm not going to say we should force it, but I'm saying in a historical standpoint, you can prove that, with
there's an argument to be made.
Because, Austria-Hungarian Empire, Yugoslavia, that didn't go so well because there was just too many different groups of people that just didn't agree on functionally everything.
Yeah,
but I mean, granted, that's their own problem.
I'm gonna.
They all wanted to violently create a culture or a government around their culture.
Well, yes,
versus I don't think that's necessary.
But there's always going to be. I think there's always going to be ethnic and racial differences, and that's it's always going to be a problem. You can't change that fact to the degree of which it is going to be. For example, like you said in Yugoslavia, it was a difference of surrounding the government to their culture. But there's always, for example, hate crimes and stuff like that based off race will always exist because you're going to disagree fundamentally, and people are. It's just there's going to be ethnic groups. There's no way to completely get ethnic groups to always agree. It's just impossible.
So I'm going to go strongly disagree. I think the first step in solving injustice in the world is having people that were experiencing those injustices share their story. I think that's really.
I think disagree for me.
I think no, it's ridiculous to say like, oh,
but you can argue that it
should shut up and like I don't really care that they're gay. No, they should share their story.
But homogenous societies have less issues. Like, so on the whole, it's I think better. It's not necessarily ideal, but if we're just purely talking about what's caused the least amount of problems, which is generally a good thing, I think it's better. But I don't think it should be enforced in any way. I think this is more of a social question, but I think there's an argument to be made on both sides. It's really just matter of how much you value one argument with the other, but I think that's more personal values than anything else.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Just because I saw something real.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Actually, I'll bring it up later. But good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Yeah, strongly agree. Yeah. This is about discipline. This is about stability. Yes.
But I think parents can discipline their children in a way that doesn't use violence.
I just think there's better ways to discipline.
There might be better ways, but I think it's dependent on the parent. So I think spanking children is perfectly capable. Just because, progressive values say, oh, that's, obviously you shouldn't get like a baseball bat and like beat your child. That's not okay. Like that's morally wrong, but
I think there are so many angry parents out there that just take their frustration out on their kids.
But that's different than discipline.
How do you differ that?
But I think
because there's difference between alcoholic parents that are just degenerates that just come home and are like, I need to beat something, rather than parents that are like, my child did something wrong, so I think they.
I don't know how you measure that though.
But I really think exactly. I think most of the time parents spanking children is not really about the discipline. It's like about them trying to exert power, force, dominance, and just.
I don't think it's dominance. I think it's a punishment. I just don't think it's necessarily.
I don't think they make it about the punishment. I don't think that I don't think
parents next question.
Are very logical.
Yeah, I don't think
I don't think it's a very logical way. I don't think they're actually trying to stop the.
I think it's logical. I just don't think it works that well.
Fix to.
All right, guys. Next one. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents.
Strongly disagree.
Agree.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty natural to have secrets.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's always a good thing, but yeah.
Possessing marijuana should not be a criminal offense. I'd agree. I mean, it's
strongly disagree. Strongly disagree.
I don't think it's much different from alcohol once you are of age. So
exactly, banning alcohol.
It's not the government's place to decide. Like
it is.
I just don't think there's no need for government intervention there, so it shouldn't.
And also,
the government does a terrible job with classifying and criminalizing drugs. I think marijuana is listed as a type 1 drug federally, which is like on the same level as heroin, which is just like, which makes no sense because literally zero people, there has not been one recorded case in the history of the world of somebody dying from a marijuana overdose. So it is ridiculous to criminalize.
Cool. Next question.
The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. I'd agree.
Strongly agree.
Strongly disagree.
Well, I would say agree or strongly agree because of the fact that I think it should teach the beneficence of the nation and its culture. I think that should be another part of the school.
I think your job should be
this is just a prime function. What's the main thing that kids need
both.
to do?
I think it should be both employment and the values and
So then you disagree because you're valuing things on an equal level.
But but I think that's still the prime function. They're both. I'm still saying it's a prime function. I'm not disagreeing. It's not a prime function. I think that there should something else be cohabited at that prime function. I would say agree then. I would say agree.
I'm going to say agree, not strongly agree, just because, yes, it should be primary goal to, prepare people for the real world. But I think it's also very important to have people be well-rounded and know things like history and science and math. Even though they might not go into that profession, I think it's valuable for them to learn a little bit of background about those topics just so they can appreciate them working and all that. So I don't think we should completely strip away the education system that we have. So I'm gonna go.
It's a strongly disagree for me. I think that the education system right now largely doesn't. I mean, how many people do you encounter right now that say that the education system did nothing to prepare them for the job that they've encountered? Like the basics.
Or it gave them a diploma, and it
right. Which is my problem with it.
But everyone has it. That's why. But most jobs, you learn things on the job, even if you go into a major.
So, which is why I'm saying that that's exactly my point.
But being taught to think critically, to articulate, and to know how to delegate your work throughout a day is preparing you for any job, right?
Right. So it's not preparing you for a job; it is preparing you how to be a human.
It's to find jobs, and I think what should also be included.
But I think that the best, well-rounded individual will get a job. Like if you're a well-rounded individual who is educated and has gotten a lot.
But there
out of
you
it.
go. Like education
find a
does
job.
help someone find a job.
I don't think the function is to prepare you for a job.
What do you
Okay,
think the
let's-
prime
let's-
function should be then?
Okay, let's move on to the next one. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. That's a tough one for me.
Strongly disagree. That's ridiculous.
It's not. That's just oppressive.
It's government overreach because technically, if because then it just depends on the government. They can consider, what's
as
an
long as
inheritable
the people are both, as long as both parents are conscious about it, I don't think there's.
It's just hard for me because I think, I wouldn't want to. I don't know. It's a difficult one for me to pick. It would be neutral.
Nathan, how come you're pro-choice on this one, but then pro-life on the abortion?
I wouldn't force them to get an abortion, is what I'm saying.
Knowing that it would die?
Knowing that it would die would be something different. Inheritable disabilities is something completely different.
Yeah, this could just be like
autism, or I don't know if autism is something that is inheritable, but
something along those lines.
Exactly. It's completely different than not surviving. Like,
all right. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline.
Agree.
Disagree. I don't think strongly disagree, but I think it's
either agree or strongly agree.
I'm gonna moderately disagree. I think it is one of the most important things, but I'm not gonna say it's the most important thing. I would say the most important thing is probably to learn to be a nice, kind, and compassionate person. I'd say discipline.
I think the most important thing for child.
I'd say discipline comes second. It is a very important thing, though.
That comes first. Being a good person is like last.
Yeah.
There are no savage and uncivilized people. There are only different cultures.
I disagree. You talk about like ritual sacrifice. That's pretty savage and uncivilized, and that's part of a culture.
That's
an extreme, sure, but I think on the whole,
I just hate the statement of like, oh well, every country is equal. America's not the best country, and it's like, what? Like, are you saying in Saudi Arabia where like women have zero rights? It's an equal country to America where everybody has freedom, everybody has liberties. We treat people
based
like people. Like I don't.
Just to get it out of the way, America's not the best country in the world.
It puzzles me. Yes, there are savage and civilized people. Of course.
No.
Okay. Those who are.
I think that everyone's on a different timeline. I just think that everyone's on a different timeline. I think there was periods of time in Europe where
that's still savage and uncivilized.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where they are on the timeline. What matters is what they are doing.
But it also,
they have the potential to not be savage.
And you also have to take into account, though, that it depends on the time period, because civilized, 100 years ago means something different than civilized today. Because, for example, a culture that, because 100 or 200 years ago, there wasn't necessarily equal rights, but something that was progressing towards that point compared to something that was completely backwards is more civilized. But in today's sense, that wouldn't necessarily be civilized.
Based on what?
Sorry, say again?
Based on like a consensus of moral value, or based on
I think it just depends on
savagery is relative.
Overall, I think the overall worldview, because at certain points in time, something's more civilized than another culture because
I definitely agree. You have to kind of take different factors into account. So like you're thinking like Thomas Jefferson. I mean, yeah, by today's standards, he is a savage and uncivilized person because he kept slaves, but he was good for his time because he wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Correct. Exactly,
and built a foundation for America. So the same thing would happen in like Saudi Arabia or the Middle East or Africa, where they have perverse ideological views, so that would make them savage and uncivilized. But I don't blame them, because exactly the same thing. I acknowledge what you're saying, Hayden, of like, yeah, they're on a different trajectory of like development. So I understand what you're saying, but we can still generally classify them as savage and uncivilized.
Okay, let's move on.
I'm doing
to the
it
next
irrespective of time, so I'm saying I just have nothing to base that off of. So
those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support.
Easy. That's
Strongly
agree. Of course. Yeah.
You can't be a dead weight.
When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheer. I don't know what that even.
I would agree with that. I think keeping yourself busy has a lot of benefits, and I think I've seen that with myself.
Definitely. I mean, I'm not going to say strongly agree. I think you definitely should take into account the thing that's troubling you. But I really like something, not a huge fan of his work, but Dennis Prager. I've seen some of his talks and lectures, and he kind of treats happiness as a moral issue as opposed to an emotional issue, because he says, and using his words here, happy people make the world great, not unhappy people. So I definitely think
that's such a weird way to. Whoa. But that's such a straw man way to look at this. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it. So just
I think ignore when you're troubled. On the whole, I think
this is like Freud, right? This is like the Freud argument. If you're troubled and you subjugate it and you press it down into your subconscious, it will. I don't think this is blocking or like shoving it down. I think this is just.
It's better
not always it's focusing totally on it down. No. It's better not to think about it. It's completely shoving it down. Don't think about it. Just be happy regardless of what's happening.
Well, and I think distractions are super helpful, I think, in the world, and they play a major role with people. And I think
if you're troubled,
but I also think you should, because like he's saying,
but you can't let it weigh you down in what you're trying to do.
I guess that's what you're trying.
If you just
let that, for example,
bear weight.
For example, if I don't know, you're unemployed, you shouldn't go watch TV because you're depressed, like you're unemployed. No, you should go find a job.
Okay, that's not what we're talking about. But Ben, no one's saying that you're being weighed down by being troubled. When you're troubled, you need to think about it, is what you're saying.
Right.
Discover why you're being troubled.
Think about it, and you're not.
Who's saying you're constantly thinking about
a positive light?
Who says you're
not at all thinking in a positive light, and you're letting that drain you? That is a bad thing.
I disagree.
Yeah, I think it can overtake people, and people can overthink things.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is like a psychological.
I think if that's the case,
yeah, we're going.
That's a separate issue.
Okay, first-generation immigrants can never fully integrate within a new country. I would say agree or strongly agree.
Agree.
I think, pretty much agree. You can't just.
Why would you
it also depends on like the cultural similarity of these countries too.
I mean,
I think like cultural integration is kind of subjective in a way, but I would say disagree. I think it could happen over time. I don't think it's going to happen like.
I think if your values are constructed by a country,
I think there's like a very limited amount of exceptions where an immigrant is super committed to integrating, but that is it's I feel like when they say integrate, you're more talking about like externally causing.
I just don't think that the concept of a country's set of values is necessarily anything concrete. So it's a agree for me.
What's good for the most successful questions is always ultimately good for all of us. I would say disagree because it's not. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, sometimes it could benefit the economy, which overall benefits everybody. But it's not all.
Always
benefits Amazon doesn't always benefit me. That's not true.
I'm on strongly disagreeing. A corporation. We already talked about this with their social responsibility. Like a corporation's responsibility is for profit, and if you're profiting, you're inherently stripping away value from the people who are laboring to create that value.
Because when people buy from corporations, they're valuing that at a certain price.
But then corporations are ultimately getting rich through that. So they're consolidating value off of stealing it from other people.
Okay, let's move on to the next one.
For later.
A broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I don't think there's much of a need for it. I mean, we have enough.
It's going to be a light, no broadcast. I'm going to go light on that, yeah.
I just don't think we need that, so we shouldn't spend public money on that.
And public money is an interesting, the way, I don't think it should be independent in that way. Like if Fox MSNBC and CNN equally receive the exact same amount of money as like a corporate stipend through like taxpayer dollars in order to keep news items afloat, then that's fine. And I also think like if you were to
But if they were all equally, but then you're subsidizing liberal ideologies more if you're subsidizing MSNBC and CNN. I don't think the government should play any role in ideologies or religion at all. I think it should reflect the general will of the population.
No, but here's what I'm saying. If a news outlet is receiving money, it needs to be very public that they are receiving that money, and that money cannot change based on their production, what they're saying.
What I'm saying here is they don't need the money. So what's the point of giving it?
What's the benefit?
It's unnecessary. It's a waste of public money.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, yeah, I could see where that would go. All right.
Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of.
Wait. Can we go back actually? Because I just thought of it. What happens if a broadcasting corporation is going down in ratings? They're not making as much money, and therefore, they start producing entertaining content rather than informative content, which then inherently makes their broadcast gain views and gain money and yet be less accurate. I think that's more.
I didn't hear everything you said.
Okay. So basically, if a news corporation is,
I feel like that's just hypothetical.
It's losing views, but I think that's a very foreseeable hypothetical.
No, because when they're businesses and when they have to make money, they change, right?
But I think if you were to fund them, irrespective of the content that they put out, if you were to fund them equally, then I don't think that there's a problem with that. So I disagree with that one.
I just don't think it's a necessary.
Guys, because we're only in for
It's just a disagreement.
I'm gonna go.
All government should be.
All right.
Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Disagree.
I would agree.
Yeah.
It's a very slight agree, but I think it's a bit overarching.
Are they talking about internet monitoring?
I think that's what they're talking about. Like, what's his name?
Snowden.
Snowden.
Basically, they're spying on our internet access and stuff like that. I guess it just depends on how they respond to, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like they would need, substantial proof, with the FISA courts and stuff like that. I think there's a little troubling stuff going on there, but I don't, with internet access, you also have to worry about stuff like that. So you do have to worry a little bit about stuff like that.
I'm gonna say I'm moderately disagree with that.
Yeah, I'm
I think it should have some monitoring because terrorism is highly facilitated by globalization and everybody having access to the internet. So.
All right, next one. The significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all argument that delay progress in a democratic political system. I mean, see, a one-party state that's not my party would be really bad for me, right? Like, I would disagree with that. But if it was my part, so you can't go for a one-party state. But there is problems with, the two-party state. I think there should be.
I think
one-party states 99% of the time are shithole.
This is in theory it works, but in actuality it doesn't. I feel
it's terrible. Yeah, because then you get censorship and Yeah, no.
It's just not.
It's one-party systems are
very unlikely to happen, and it's unsustainable. Yeah. If at all it's possible, it's unsustainable. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Significant amount. Okay. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried.
I would disagree because people can get into your computer through.
Right. I mean, what is wrongdoing? The subjectivity of wrongdoing is so flawed.
I think it's just a bit you're teetering on an oppressive regime. I'm not going to say it's there because I think that's dramatic.
That's strongly disagree for me.
Okay, so the death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes.
strongly disagree.
I would say strongly agree.
I think the
In the
death penalty
case of the U.S., I would say disagree, just because it costs more money to.
Because we don't do it in an efficient way, like hang them or shoot them in the head. Like we don't need to.
Right. I would say if there are firing squads or a hanging system.
Ben, the money that the death penalty comes from is not from the actual act. It's in the legal fees that the state pays for, and the money that it takes to keep people in solitary confinement on death row.
It's a portion of both though, because it's
so unless you're trying to expedite that process and make it faster and therefore cost less, which would then in turn mean you're executing innocent people, then it will never cost less.
I just think it's kind of too much to, like, when you kill someone, there's no way to fix that whatsoever, and it's kind of putting too much faith into the government.
But that also,
I'm just really torn on this issue because part of me says, well, the primary role of the justice system is justice and punishment. The primary objective is that the criminal gets brought to justice. So in that sense, they should be killed for serious crimes. But the other part of me says, well, yeah, if we speed up the system and we, speed up death row, then innocent people are getting killed.
I don't think it's an amiable policy.
Here's my thing. I think that they should rot in prison if they do something like that.
But that's just.
Why do you think people who commit terrible crimes kill themselves a lot of the time? Because they can't live with themselves. So if you're forcing them to live with themselves, that's more justice than killing.
But that's also dependent. That's dependence on the person, because it's not necessarily true for all the cases. And there's plenty of cases where they did not kill themselves. And also, in terms of going back to, going back to not necessarily cost, but what we're about like keeping them in prison or whatever instead of killing them. I forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
I think we're kind of getting in circles now.
Okay.
In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like obeyed and commanded is the wrong wording, but I do think a class system is needed, at least in the very least in our society.
I don't think anyone has the inherent right to obey, and I don't think anyone is inherently labeled as someone who needs to be.
But this isn't saying people are delegated to one or the other by some absolute force. This is just saying that I feel like it's just a harsh wording of a class system.
It's saying that some people are inherently those who obey, and people are inherently those who command.
No, this is saying there must be people who obey and must be people who command. This isn't saying there must be a certain group of people who will always obey and a certain group of people who will always command.
For example, in our governmental system, if we were just to have everyone be on you need someone delegated to make the laws, someone delegated to command what we were supposed to do.
But they should be commanded by the people and the vote of the people.
But then that's also someone commanding something else, so then there's a difference.
Right, but if you have people who are legislators who are commanding the people to follow law, they should be held in check by people who, in turn, command them by their vote. I don't think that there's a certain group that inherently commands at all times and inherently obeys at all times. I think it's a strongly disagreement.
They always are inherently obeying, or are always inherently. It's just saying that there needs to be people that obey and then those people that.
But I think it should always be a check. I think that those who obey and those who command should always be held in check by the other.
But it's not saying that the people that command can't also have to obey.
It is saying that. Must always obey and must always command. It is what it's saying.
I would just disagree with them then.
I don't think we're gonna get it. I just feel like this is a very influenced way of wording it that's sort of leading you to one answer. I don't think it's good wording at all. Okay, abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all.
Agree.
I don't care button.
I think that art is
that goes against the literal
interpretation.
definition of abstract art. Abstract art is art that represents something else than what's on the page. So if it doesn't represent, if a piece of art does not represent anything, then there's literally no point for it existing. And furthermore, to go along with the point of this question is it's not abstract art. It doesn't even fit the definition. So, of course,
I don't really care, honestly.
Criminal justice
either, but
okay, let's in criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I would say agree or strongly agree.
Strongly agree, 100%.
I'd say agree, I think that if you only focus on punishment, you're gonna have people who re-enter it, and then that costs more money. It's just not a good policy. But
I just think it depends on the crime level too, because if they're going to get out of jail, then there's a certain necessity for rehabilitation.
But what are the majority of criminal prosecutions? Not murder.
No. Well, I know. So, but I think there should be a combination for those people.
But I feel like punishment is the most obvious way to solve crime. It's the most obvious way to deter it. And if you don't make punishment the chief goal of something,
I think
make arresting and putting people in prison less effective.
Okay.
I think that's the primary goal.
I don't think so.
Is punishment.
It is a waste of time to try and
rehabilitation will always triumph. I think when you positively associate things with people, it is always psychologically proven to be more powerful than negative association.
Yeah, but you still need deterrence.
Let's move on.
But what prevent people who aren't yet criminals?
No, but the most dangerous people in the world are people who don't have anything to live for. Who don't. So when you sit there and say, oh well, if you're punishing them, then they won't do it again. Why wouldn't they do it again?
I'm just saying punishment has to be the chief goal of criminal justice. So it's more important.
Move on to the next one because it's the same thing. It's a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals.
I'd say agree.
Agree or
strongly agree. Some are
disagree.
Psychopaths.
But some people are never going
to
stop society again, and it's a waste of funding to rehabilitate them if they're just going to sit in prison if they've done something so egregious. You can argue they don't even have the right.
Waste of time. It's waste of time or waste of money. Because if you're only specified as waste of time,
I think those two are interlocked. Time is money.
Okay, next one.
The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist.
Strongly disagree. Strongly disagree. I think the business person and the manufacturer will always have less impact on a society as a whole than the writer and the artist.
I think maybe.
But I think you need the business person and manufacturer.
Rather than the writer and the artist.
The writer and the artist is something that's very good for social well-being. But it's not a necessity. Like, you don't need jobs. You don't need
I think it also depends on the culture, too, because, when cultures are developing, you need something to establish the culture. Books are.
There's a reason why we always remember artists from time periods, but we never remember business people.
Because there's not so many.
Remember businesses.
Because there's not so many significant artists and writers. There's only a few of them.
Very few businessmen are are inherently
as
the artist who creates their art. There's usually one business.
All right, so next one. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I would strongly disagree.
I mean, I would say strongly agree, but I would hold fathers to the same.
Yeah, I would. Well,
that's a good point.
It's not a sexist thing, but yeah.
Yeah, because
if you have a child.
But if it's specifying mothers, then I think that it goes hand in hand.
I think the best system is most commonly, it's best to have a mother who is primarily a homemaker, but it's not the only way to do it. I just think, generally speaking, people can't juggle so many things. And so, I feel like the mother's just been naturally delegated to that role, but I'd say it's more the first duty it has to be the first duty of someone to be a homemaker. And generally that's
I don't know.
I don't think it's the only way. It's just kind of.
I think that the definition of homemaker is a very subjective definition.
Okay.
Yeah, I can be kind of loose, I suppose. Yeah.
Next one, multinational companies are unethically exploiting the genetic resources of developing countries. I would agree. I would agree in the sense that it harms the host or the home country that loses the wages and it.
But they're not losing in wages because.
Well, because it's not. Yeah,
they're paid more fairly.
Because it's talking about resources more, but it also includes that of employees. Because you obviously need people to dig up resources.
Well, human resources is part of that.
Exactly. So I'm saying that if what they do harms the country that they're supposed to be helping, like by taking away outsourcing labor, then I would agree. Just depend.
I think on the whole it's unethical, but it's not quite as bad as a lot of people say, I suppose. Just because, it's still providing jobs that wouldn't be there otherwise if they're paying more, or if they were paying so much that it would just be back in where their main market is.
I just think it's always unethical.
I think it's mainly unethical, but there is a certain caveat for me to clarify.
So here's the way I view it. So I don't know if you heard this stat, but when the British went to colonize India and extracted all of the resources during the Industrial Rev, India at the time owned a third of all of the value of raw resources in the entire world.
Guys, let's speed it up because it's been a little.
But that's not a That's not a multinational company. It was the
East India Tea Company.
All right, do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not debate this one that much because it's kind of just a different.
Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity.
Disagree.
I would agree with that, definitely.
I would agree. But
I think this goes back to the question about all authority should be challenged. And I think if you just are raised to believe everything is okay and everything is working out fine, you have to be a questioner. You have to take some.
Yes.
You have to have some level of skepticism in your life. You can't just.
Yes.
I don't think this is saying there's no skepticism. I think this is saying that you just have to be
making peace is accepting the way it is, though.
I don't think that's good for
exactly.
a mature.
If you accept its peace, then you're not going to make any change. I mean, maybe you'll try to make.
Then you can't dream of a better world.
You're making peace with the fact that you live in that society and that is the circumstances you're living in. You're not making peace with the fact that you like it or that you support it. I think this is more just saying.
But if you're peaceful about that, if you're inherently peaceful about the way that it is, I think you are in a way liking it.
But that's a difference between reformist and revolutionary, because then you're talking about.
Yeah, because you can be at peace with something and still want to make it better. But you're saying you're not.
All right, here, let's keep going then. Everyone pick their own. I mean, I'm sure everyone. That's sort of one where.
Astrology accurately explains many things. Strongly disagree.
Astrology is for spads.
It is.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
Wait, what? Is this a real political question? Okay.
Neil deGrasse
cannot be moral without being religious. Strongly disagree.
I'm just kidding. I love you. Not really.
Strongly disagree. Yeah, I mean,
you cannot be moral.
You can be immoral and be religious, and you can be.
I would say strongly agree.
What?
You cannot be moral without being religious.
When you're not a religious person, then your definition of what is moral and what isn't changes. So then there is no moral.
But then that's the debate whether or not morality is subjective, or if
it is.
But that's a completely different debate, and I can debate you on that, but I'm not going to do it right now because.
Right.
Okay.
It is objectively subjective. Does that make sense?
Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. I'd rather be charity because that just takes out the government aspect, which I think will be most commonly better than what the government's doing. But
how many people charity is? But how many people?
It's more comprehensive than charity, so it is needed. I don't know. That's a tough one.
That's why you should follow the Bismarck model.
It's definitely better than Social Security.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to
rely on charity. We shouldn't solely rely on charity.
Correct. Yeah. So disagree or agree would be weird.
It's nice if you have charity, but at the same time, like how often is charity happening compared to Social Security?
For the next one, this one is completely like idiotic. So can we just skip it?
Some people are naturally unlucky.
Like, how does that have anything to do
Disagree. Strongly disagree.
Like, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, some people are born unlucky.
Yeah, your
If
circumstances.
you're born with low income
To me, luck
and you have
luck is the
parents that are
combination of
drug
preparation
addicts,
and opportunity.
What? But my
No,
point
but,
is, why
but
are
where you're born,
yeah,
that's
of course
nothing.
people are
That's just
naturally
sheer.
unlucky.
my point is we can't. There's no point in debating. This is not a political question. Just put your answer.
It's a philosophical question.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with it just because, like,
Political question. I would say liberal people would say strongly. They would tend to agree more because they think that it's harder to build yourself up and
That would be
finance
fiscal.
the economic.
I mean, I don't really care about my alignment. I think that I disagree with the fact that people are naturally
Necessarily socially.
I think
because
people
unlucky
are,
to me
but
is
I
different
think-
than naturally like disadvantaged.
But I
That's
feel like that's a dangerous. I think it's in some ways true, but it's sort of dangerous to adopt because if you always say you're unlucky or you're naturally
then you're
unlucky, then that's just a scapegoat, and that's not a good thing at all.
luck is the
Think
combination
of yourself as
preparation and
unlucky, but
opportunity.
like
Guys, come on. Let's skip the next. Let's go to the next one. Because like, why are you guys
Right.
debating like if people are unlucky? Like that really.
It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly disagree.
I think
I would
schools that
say
instill
replace-
religious values are immoral.
I would.
That is so immoral.
No. If you want to send your kid to a private school that teaches one religion, that is your decision as a parent, and that is something that you're valuing. It's not.
Yeah.
It's
Nico,
important
and I
that
would also like to say
I think it should
that
be
in
legal.
that
that
all
and
schools.
so
This
low,
is saying my
I think
child's
it's
school.
immoral. I
I don't think it's immoral if you want to send your kid to get a private education that's Christian.
I also don't think it's.
I think it's
If you were to replace.
imagine being raised knowing that there is an idea of your sins. The punishment for you committing sin is eternally hell.
Based.
If you
So-
want to teach your kids that is
so
your
oppressive.
prerogative.
That's
All right.
that's just so immoral. I can't even.
Not
All
even-
right, so
It's-
anyway,
it's
I'm strongly
parenting.
disagree for everything on this page.
Yeah.
Sex outside marriage is usually.
I would say agree or strongly agree.
I've looked like this for a while. All right. Ooh, look at this one.
This one we should go fast because this is debating like religious values completely.
This is
different.
like philosophical stuff, which is really important for me for political stuff.
Yeah, I think
All right,
stuff.
For me, I don't really weigh this stuff in my political opinions that
I
much.
think it's
more
strongly
personal.
it will be weighed on your authority scale, though. Just
No, I'm
psychologically.
saying this doesn't really matter to me in political reasons, so I'm answering with that in mind.
Sex outside of marriage is usually moral. Agree. Same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of adoption. Agree. Strongly agree.
What'd you say on the first one, Hayden?
I said agree. Just regular agree.
Huh. Okay.
Do you mean for the other to be on it?
Yes, it should be legal for the adult population. Strongly agree.
I just
Disagree.
agree on it. What goes on in a private bedroom between two consenting adults is no business of the state. I'd strongly agree with that.
Agree.
One can feel naturally homosexual. I disagree with that.
Agree.
Openness about sex
Ooh,
not too far.
that's a really
Actually,
good
yeah, I'd kind of.
I would strongly agree with this.
I agree. I just think I don't really want to hear about it. I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
I mean, it depends because this is just, their phrasing on these questions are just so.
I don't like
I
this
mean, are you
idea.
talking about like the Me Too movement and women coming forward telling their stories of
No,
sex?
I don't think that's it. I
I
think
don't
that,
think that's what they're
I
talking
think it's
about.
more talking about like drag being pushed into children's schools and stuff like that. With
But
drag,
how drag isn't inherently sexual.
but like what the sexuality of.
I
what
think it
it-
is connotated with it for a lot of people, though.
Okay, next. Let's see where you stand.
All right, let's do it.
That
Okay. Okay. Okay.
I haven't answered one.
Cringe. Preparing or cringe.
I thought I would end up more there. Yeah. All right.
I'm just further right than him. I'm 3.75 economic right and 2.47 social libertarian. Interesting.
Here's what I got.
Oh, economic right though. Yeah, I see. Okay.
Oh wow.
Buddy.
Hayden, what are you?
Everything.
So that's like as far as you can go.
I think that's the worst.
So based.
I don't know. It doesn't exist. It's not a.
Worst quadrant.
Interesting.
That's fine.
No, it does exist, Nico. It does.
Not yet, I suppose. You could argue it can, but I don't think it does.
I think that the problem is, it's like with the debate with the French Rev versus the Glorious Rev. When you have a radical change going very quickly, there's inherently a power struggle that is very quick, and that leads way to corruption and specifically authoritarian regimes taking over that. Like if there was a country that slowly transitioned into communism, you'd have a hard time convincing me that they wouldn't be inherently democratic.
Well, I mean, most likely it is democratic, but I mean, you could have a monarchy that's slowly changing to communism because they want to, but they also think that rapid change wouldn't be good. But
I think a monarchy changing to communism would entail the people gaining power, which then they would overthrow because then the monarch owns all the land.
I mean, fair enough.
Anyway, I'm really far.
Me and Hayden are the exact opposite quadrant.
Okay, 3,
Fringe,
2,
fringe.
1.
Base?
Based.